Hey guys, welcome back to John's Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm John, and as always, thank you guys for being here. I hope you guys won your matchups in Week 6. We are on to Week 7. I know it's crazy. The season's moving fast so far. Hopefully you guys are doing well. I mean, the fantasy football landscape is tough. To be honest, my picks last week were not good. They were pretty horrible, to be honest with you. Taysom Hill was one of my weekly picks. Eno Benjamin was one of my weekly picks, and he ended up having a better game on Thursday night than he did last Sunday. So hopefully you guys got him back into your lineup this week. But my picks weren't that good. But I saw a stat this past week that this is I think it is the lowest amount of fantasy points scored in the last 13 years of fantasy football. So it's a rough start to the season for whatever reason it might be. There's just not a lot of touchdowns and fantasy points being scored. It could be because a lot of these top teams lost some receivers. The Bucs and Brady lost Antonio Brown and Gronkowski. Rodgers lost Devontae Adams. A lot of these top teams are losing and changing a lot of those receivers. It takes time to gain that chemistry back and gain chemistry with new players. So for whatever reason, we're having a slow start to the season, but I'm going to try to be better for you guys with my picks. And honestly, in this show, I am going to be doing a Q&A section, questions that you guys have asked on the chalkboard, and I'm going to answer them and shout you guys out on this podcast. So if you guys are here and you don't know, we did start a chalkboard. Chalkboard's a perfect chance. It's a free app and a free board for you guys to join. And basically, it's where you can get updates on Dorm Debate. We could chat with each other through a live game chat. There's fantasy football chat. There's a general football chat. There's a podcast ideas chat. And that's where I posted my comment and my question for this podcast. And I said, guys, I'm going on my fantasy football podcast this weekend, and I want to answer your guys' questions. I want to do a Q&A segment for this podcast. And a lot of people responded and sent some questions in that they want me to answer. And that's what I'm going to be doing in this episode, is answering your guys' questions and shouting you out. So if you aren't already on the chalkboard, definitely go over to the chalkboard right now. The link is in our bio. I'll have Jared throw a link in the description to our chalkboard so that you guys can join, get updates, and we can interact more throughout the season. It's kind of like a main hub for our content and giving you guys updates and notifications. One example is actually on Tuesday, my waiver video I usually post, TikTok wasn't letting us post it. It ended up getting posted around 11 p.m. Eastern time, which might have been too late for you guys to put in your waivers. Maybe you fell asleep, but I put my waiver ads on the chalkboard around 5 p.m. Eastern time, so giving you guys updates there. All right, so now I'm going to get into the questions that you guys asked on the chalkboard. The first one is from A. Snyder 4444, and he asks, what should we do with Waller? Now, I did cover Waller in one of my previous videos, but since then, the news has changed on Waller. It doesn't seem like he's going to play tomorrow. He has that hamstring injury. Like I said before, maybe you try to trade away Waller to one of these teams in your league that really thinks that he's going to come back and be good the second half of the season. I'm not too high on him. Honestly, the tight ends, unless you have Kelsey or Andrews, you're really just trying to skate by each week by getting 10 points. And Waller hasn't even been doing that for you. So if you could trade Waller, I would try. I always say shop around, see what you can get. And I would definitely not be opposed to trading Waller away and streaming some tight ends, because there's some tight ends that you could pick up weekly and stream just to get 10 points. One of the guys last week that I recommended was Greg Dulcich on Monday Night Football. He ended up with a 39-yard touchdown. So you could stream some of these tight ends. If you could trade Waller for a decent flex guy, then you might want to do that. The second question I have right here is by Challen_23, says, what should we do with Jamar Chase? Now, I did mention Chase on a previous podcast, I think 2 ago, and I did say that you guys should trade away Jamar Chase. I'm a little bit worried about him. I still stand by that. I think Chase, with that offensive line, the Bengals don't look as good. Plus, I know it's early and may be too early for you guys to look, but I really like looking into the future, and Jamar Chase and the Bengals have tough playoff matchups in the fantasy football playoffs. So if I have Jamar Chase, I'd be a little bit concerned. He just had a great game, was the wide receiver 1, and he's probably going to have a great game tomorrow against the Falcons. So maybe after 2 back-to-back good games, you trade him away. Maybe you can get a guy like Cooper Kupp or Justin Jefferson, or maybe you can even get a lower-tier receiver and that has high upside, and maybe a running back as well. If you can get like a Dameon Pierce or Kenneth Walker, in addition to another wide receiver like a Chris Godwin, I would do a trade like that for Jamar Chase. And then the next question I have is by TW68. He always seems to be commenting on the chalkboard, so I really appreciate that. He says, should we buy into the Kenneth Walker hype and use him? And my answer to that is yes. I'm really high on Kenneth Walker. He looks great. I mean, if you saw him last week, he had some great runs. He had that 20-yard run down the sideline that was crazy, evaded like 4 or 5 tacklers. He got into the end zone, finished with about 19 fantasy points. And I really like him for the rest of the season. I think he has a great game tomorrow. If you have him, you got to start him against the Chargers, who have been horrible against the ground. And this team's been able to move the ball down the field. Geno looks better than we thought he was going to look. So moving the ball down the field, Walker's going to get those chances by the goal line, and he's the unquestioned back. The only concern with Walker is his pass down usage. He doesn't really get that. DJ Dallas was in on third down, but maybe as we see him get more comfortable in the offense, we see him be used more on third down. But in terms of Walker, if you have him, keep him. If you don't have him, try to extend a trade to the person in your league that has them, see what you can get for them, and see how they value them, because I'm really high on Walker. JV Bing says, what to do with Amon-Ra with Williams coming back, and that's talking about Jamison Williams. Now, Jamison Williams is expected to return within the next couple weeks, but Amon-Ra, I don't think is going to be affected by that. Amon-Ra plays inside. He doesn't play outside, so he's not going to have to worry about Jamison taking snaps on the outside away from him. And I think Amon-Ra is still the number one passing option in this offense. Hawkinson is there, but Amon-Ra is the number one passing option. Like Goff said earlier in the preseason, and we saw throughout the first few weeks, whenever plays break down, he's looking for Amon-Ra. And I think this week against the Cowboys, he gets back on track after the bye with a healthy ankle. I'm really high on Amon-Ra. If you have him, keep him. If you don't have him, he could be a potential buy low. I mean, he's had great weeks, but he was injured and then had the bye. So if you can get him before tomorrow, you might be able to get him at a little bit of a lower price. But if you have him on Rock, keep him and start him with some confidence. And JV Bing also says, is Henderson hype worth it? So is the Darrell Henderson hype worth it? I don't think it's worth it. And if you guys are part of the chalkboard, you guys would have already known that I said you should pick up Kyren Williams. He's a rookie running back drafted in the 3rd round by the Los Angeles Rams. And he was actually supposedly supposed to have a big role in week 1, even with Akers and Henderson there. And he's a running back, but he actually got hurt before week 1 and he got put on IR. He's supposed to return from IR maybe after this week after their bye, maybe in the next 2 weeks. But I think Kyren Williams could have a big role when he returns. And I'm not really sold on Darrell Henderson. I think he might have been a 1-week wonder. If you have him and somebody wants him, trade him away. Maybe you can get some good value for him. If you don't have Henderson, don't try to get him. Maybe pick up Kyren Williams, stash him on your bench. In 3 weeks, Kyren Williams could be a starter for me as an RB2. So I would not buy the Henderson hype right now. Moving on, TW68, another comment from him says, was Eno Benjamin a one-hit wonder fantasy player, or can he be used for the full season? Now, this is going to depend on the health of James Conner. James Conner didn't play this past Thursday night. Eno Benjamin actually started 2 games ago last Sunday, and he started on Thursday. And he actually had a really great game on Thursday, of course, the week after I pick him to be a weekly pick. He goes off the second week. He ended up with about 23, 24 fantasy points on Thursday. He had a really great game, punched one into the end zone. Now, the Saints haven't been great. Defensively, the Cardinals put up, I think, 42 points. So Benjamin did get a good amount of work in that game. But in terms of moving forward, it's going to depend on James Conner's health. Now, in terms of long-term, if I had to guess, I'd say that James Conner probably won't play next week, but I think he'll probably come back the week after. Once James Conner returns, Eno Benjamin's stock goes way down. He's not really even useful in fantasy football. So if somebody's extending a trade offer for you for Eno Benjamin, I would definitely maybe look to move him. You could get some good value trading away Benjamin after a really good 23, 24-point week. If you don't have Benjamin, I wouldn't go try to get him. Honestly, James Conner, he could be a sneaky guy to add. It kind of hurts me that Marquise Brown got injured. I really wanted to see him there matched up with the CB2s on the other team, as the CB1 would be matched up with Hopkins. But this team, they're going to be able to move the ball down the field more with Hollywood coming back maybe in 5 weeks, 6 weeks. But James Conner, as he gets healthier, he could be a buy low option now, but you might be able to even wait a week or 2 to get James Conner. His matchups are okay, but his usage is really going to depend on his health and how much this team can move the ball down the field, because they were able to do it against the Saints, but in terms of a season-long, view on Connor, it's not really going to be until later in the season when Hollywood comes back that this offense is really going to be firing on all cylinders. So in terms of Eno Benjamin, he's kind of a one-week wonder, but you might be able to squeeze a little bit more out of him. If you have the option to trade him away, I would do it. If you can get a guy like Kenneth Walker, Breece Hall, you won't be able to get. Probably Dameon Pierce, you probably won't be able to get. But anybody with high upside that is going to be useful for the long term, maybe you want to trade Eno Benjamin for James Conner. I don't know, but you might want to move him. A Snyder 4444, another comment says, what should I do with Waller? And should I start Greg Dulcich over him? I'm thinking this is a question for this week. Waller doesn't seem like he's going to play this week. Greg Dulcich is a pretty good start for this week against the Jets. He did get a touchdown last week. You could definitely stream Greg Dulcich. I think he could be a viable option this week. He's only projected like 5.7. I think he could beat that by a little bit. So you could take the flyer in him. There's a bunch of other tight ends that could get to 10. I like Tunyon a little bit more. I liked his usage last week, and they play the Commanders this week. And then Jay Burns says, which Packers wide receiver can break out in this offense for the rest of the season? And for me, that's an easy answer. It's Allen Lazard. He's already broken out. He's gotten 8 targets in the last 3 games. And Romeo Doubs is the next guy up. But I think Lazard, in terms of getting touchdowns, getting targets, Lazard is the guy here. And I told you guys preseason to draft him. Hopefully you guys did. If you didn't, Lazard is going to be the number 1 in this offense for the rest of the season. The only guy that can contend with him is Romeo Doubs. So I think those 2 are the guys you want on your fantasy team and you want in your flex spots. They're not much more than that. Maybe wide receiver 2 for Lazard some weeks, probably tomorrow. I would try to get Lazard into your lineup. But that's my opinion on that. And then iQuick32 says same for the Chiefs. So talking about the receivers for the Chiefs, which one of them is going to step up? It's going to be somebody different every week, like we saw Mahomes say it about a few weeks ago in the preseason and early in the season. He says it's going to be a different guy each week. 2 weeks ago, we saw Marquez Valdez-Scantling get 9 catches, I think 70 yards. And then last week, it was Juju getting all the catches, and he had a touchdown, and Valdez-Scantling literally had 3 targets, no catches, 0 fantasy points. The only guys you can trust in this offense are Kelsey and maybe Edwards-Helaire. Juju, Valdez-Scantling, Hardman, it's going to be a different guy each week. So in terms of who I think is going to be the top scorer in that offense, it's going to be Juju. I think he's probably going to be the number 1 scorer, but he didn't even really look that good. It remains to be seen. I'm excited to see them tomorrow against the 49ers. That should be a great game. But talking about the 49ers, if you guys saw the post that we put up Thursday night, we actually, right now, for me, for you guys, you're viewing this on Saturday, but for me, it's actually Thursday night right now, and we had to pause the podcast, the recording of the podcast, because McCaffrey got traded to the 49ers. Now, all of you know that happened 2 days ago, but for me, it only happened a few minutes ago, and we posted the live reaction that Jared and I had on our TikTok account. But I'm sure a lot of you guys are asking, how does that change the fantasy football landscape, CMC to the 49ers? Let's talk about the Panthers first. I think they're in full rebuild mode. In terms of picking up one of their running backs, Deonta Foreman has gotten a lot more work lately than Chuba Hubbard. I think it's going to be a committee there. Maybe Cam Akers gets traded to the Panthers, but even if he does, it's not somebody I would really trade for. I wouldn't give up too much for Akers, because even if he's the starting running back there or competes with Foreman and Hubbard, I mean, that offense is still horrible. It's going to have a tough time moving the ball down the field and getting touchdowns. So in terms of that backfield, unless you're in a 14-man league, I probably wouldn't even pick anybody up. If you are, I would prefer Foreman over Hubbard. And in terms of the 49ers, that really drops the stock of Jeff Wilson, drops the stock of Tevin Coleman. He's a drop now. Elijah Mitchell is basically a drop. Jeff Wilson, you might want to hold on to just for this week, just to see what happens with McCaffrey. But him, you're probably not wanting to keep on your team anymore. McCaffrey is going to be the workhorse back for this offense, and it's a great run offense. I think in terms of McCaffrey's fantasy value, I think it's actually probably a tiny bit better for McCaffrey that he's on the 49ers. Now, the reason I say a tiny bit is because, yes, he's on a better offense, and they're going to be able to move the ball down the field. He'll have a better chance to score touchdowns. But in the Panthers offense, he was getting a lot of catches, 8 catches, 9 catches a game. The 49ers don't throw to the running backs as much. But like I said, McCaffrey will be able to get more touchdowns because that offense in San Francisco is better. They'll be able to move the ball down the field. So I think it's about even, but I think McCaffrey, his upside is a little higher being on the 49ers. And in terms of the other players on the 49ers, you have to downgrade I think the biggest guy that takes a downgrade is Deebo Samuel. Ayuk, I wouldn't really downgrade, and Kittle, I wouldn't downgrade, but Deebo probably won't get many more snaps in the backfield with McCaffrey there, Jeff Wilson there, Elijah Mitchell coming back from IR in a couple weeks. I'm worried about Deebo because most of his usage late last season was running the football and getting handoffs out of the backfield, punching in for some touchdowns. So I'm worried about Deebo. If you have Deebo, I would hold him just to see how this offense plays out for the next week or two. But if you don't have Deebo, I wouldn't go ahead and trade for him yet. I'd rather see you trade for CMC, but it's going to be tough to get CMC because everybody who has him is super excited about him, and I have him in one of my 6-man leagues, and I'm super excited to see what he could do. But that's going to do it for this fantasy football podcast. Like I said, if you guys aren't on the Chalkboard, go to the link in our bio, go to the link in the description, join our Chalkboard so you can get updates, and you could get all of my thoughts just in case anything happens with TikTok. So head over there, good luck in your matchups this week, and have fun.